from ChemKnits, and here is the recap of the live stream where I drew two different colors of Wilton icing color at random, combined them in equal parts, and then dip dyed some wool-based yarn into these random combinations of color to see what kind of fun combinations we could create. I had, I think 19 different colors of the Wilton icing color in my collection, and we used 16 unique mixtures of dye for these 8 skeins of yarn. We used 4 different yarn bases in this live stream. These are all yarn bases that I get from Knit Picks, and if you're interested in getting some for yourself, you can find an affiliate link to them in the video description. The 4 bases that we used today were Stroll fingering weight yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn, which is 100% Peruvian highland wool, Swish DK, which is 100% superwash merino wool, and then finally the surprise sock was Knit Picks Bear Hawthorn, which is 80% superwash fine highland wool, 20% polyamide. And it has a bit of a tighter twist than the Stroll, which I think gives it another fun element for these 2 sock bases that are so similar. For all of the mixtures, I started with 8 cups of water and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And when I drew the 2 colors, I mixed a 1/4 teaspoon of one color, a 1/4 teaspoon of the second color, and mixed them in 1/2 cup of water, which I added to the dye bath immediately before dip dyeing the pre-soaked yarn. I had considered altering the proportions of the colors depending on if I thought that one might overwhelm the other, but I decided to just go for it and look at the beautiful things that we created. Now let's take a closer look at the finished dry yarn. The first one that we dyed was a combination of moss green and teal on the Stroll fingering base. And I'd say we have a grass green that gets progressively more and more blue. Yellows do exhaust a bit faster than blue, but you really only see breaking with a green when it's more of a blue green, because if there's not a lot of blue in your pot, the blue will start to bind a little too soon and you won't see very much of it at the end. But we have a very much like a teal at the last end to go into the pot, and more of a grass green at the other end. Number 2, I pulled violet and creamy peach. And I was a little nervous about this. I was a little nervous that we would get something brown. But we've got a fuchsia that goes up into this sort of dusty green, and I think that it's gorgeous. Surprisingly, the combination for number 3, which is on the Hawthorn base, and was a combination of rose plus Kelly green, is very similar to the violet and creamy peach. The one main difference between these 2 colorways is that the colors are much more saturated here. And I think that that's because creamy peach is less pigmented than rose. So I think that overall we just had a lot more of some of the colors. And maybe Kelly green has a bit more blue than the violet. So the combinations, we have a bright bluish green, but very much a green at one end. And then it's almost like we have a green that's glazed with fuchsia at the other end. It doesn't quite read brown to me. In some lights it starts to look a little bit more brown. So maybe it's a bit of a brownish red, but really there's places where you look and you see green with like almost a fleck of the red on the outside. And that's because these red number 3s strike so quickly that you get this glazed, almost glazed feel to it. For number 4, we drew cornflower blue and ivory, and this is on the Swish base. And the colorway is very similar to number 5, which was a combination of delphinium blue and black. Both of them have sort of a blue-green, it's a little more turquoise in number 5, And then we've got more pinks going through. The main difference, however, is, again, there's a lot more pigment in number 5 than number 4. And part of that is ivory. If you think about it, ivory ends up looking very much like a brown, but there isn't very much dye present in that color overall. Whereas black is probably one of the most pigmented colors because you need a lot of dye molecules to try to make a black icing. I love this combination of the black with the delphinium blue. And I haven't actually looked at cornflower blue on its own yet to know. It has a little bit of red and yellow, I think, in it. But I think that, you know, this is a colorway that I can see myself repeating over and over. I know that some people, I guess with the number 4, with the ivory with cornflower blue, this does look very similar to what you can get with a broken black, but with less of that purple tone overall. Whenever I break black, there's a bit more of that purpley color. Number 6 was a combination of leaf green and buttercup yellow. And it's a little hard to see what the differences are here. And so I think I would almost call this a tonal yarn. But we have the green that went in first is way more yellow than the green that went into the pot last, which has more blue. So I think that we have the blue overall, but there's just like gradient of the yellow. So we go from, you know, more of a lime green to more of sort of an apple or grass green at the other end. It's very, very subtle. And maybe it could have been more dramatic if I had started with more vinegar, but I really like getting a dip dyed yarn where the saturation feels similar throughout, but it's the tone that shifts from one end to the other. And so that's one thing I find a lot of fun. I know a lot of people were really, really nervous about brown when I was going to do this experiment. And surprisingly, we didn't really get something that felt really muddy so far. But when I drew for number 7, copper and brown, we knew we were going to get something brown, right? Because it's in there. And we've got this, it's almost a terracotta orange. And I don't really see breaking here. This is very much a tonal yarn because we've got a lighter end and a darker end. And, you know, maybe there's more yellow or red down at one end than the other. It's a little hard to say for certain. But this color is gorgeous and really does not feel brown at all. I mean, I guess, yes, maybe it's like an orangish brown. It's an earthy tone. It's not bright, but I think that it's lovely. I mean, I personally happen to like the color brown as well. My last name is Brown, but I think that this is just beautiful. And then finally, with number 8, I pulled burgundy and royal blue. And when we look at this final yarn, it looks very, very similar to a good friend of mine, and that is broken black. And in a second, I'm going to pull up those two skeins so that way we can compare what they look like. Here we have number 8, which is a combination of burgundy and royal blue compared with a broken violet. And can you tell which one's which? The broken violet is on the bottom, and the combination we dyed in this recent live stream is on top. Ultimately, the colorways are really, really, really similar. One minor difference is that burgundy contains a little bit of yellow, but otherwise, both of these yarns were made from a combination of red number 3 and blue number 1. I think that overall, there is more blue number 1 in the mixture of the royal blue and burgundy. There's very little red in that blue, and we know that that blue is super potent. And so I think that that's why the colorway reads as more purple and blue overall. There's a lot more red, I think, in the violet here. Or maybe it was just, because there's a little less blue, Therefore, it reads as a lot more red than it does in the burgundy plus royal blue combination. And both of these skeins were dyed with a total of 1/2 teaspoon of food coloring. It is possible, and very likely actually, that the burgundy is a much more saturated color in terms of the amount of food coloring that is present there than violet. And so, especially because the food coloring recipes are so similar. And so that could also account for the increase in overall color in the new skein. But anyway, I thought that, because once we did this, it really felt like a dip dyed broken violet, and it is really, really, really close. So, which colorway do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. I pre-sold yarns 1 through 8 in this live stream, so they are not going to end up in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store. However, Broken Violet, this actually exact skein of Broken Violet, is currently in the shop. Not only that, but you can purchase the Broken Violet colorway on either the Stroll or Wool of the Andes worsted base from the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store. And those are almost always available in the shop. So if you want to bring that colorway home, there's plenty available for everyone. Finally, there is one more skein of yarn that I dyed in this live stream. While I was mixing dyes and opening vials, there were little bits of dye that got on knives and spoons, left at the bottom of cups. I combined all of this together, so a mixture of 16 different colors of Wilton's icing color to create this final skein on the bottom. Overall, the saturation of color is less than the rest of the yarn that we dyed in this live stream. But we got some really pretty breaking from a brownish red to this this green. It's almost a grayish green. And I think that it's a very like autumn, outside, earthy colorway. But it doesn't really feel muddy to me. When people talk about muddy colors, maybe people consider it muddy because you're not seeing the sharp, vibrant, almost neon shades that you would have seen individually. But I think that, I don't know, I think that for me, muddy almost feels like a pejorative when really it can be something that is absolutely lovely. But it all depends on what your expectations are. And if you want to dye a rainbow and have sharp rainbow colors, but then you end up getting some more muted combinations, I can understand why you'd feel like, uh-oh, it muddied. The colors didn't strike fast enough. But anyway, I am interested that I think the closest we got to brown was from this color that we did at the end that had a little bit of everything kind of mixed together. A lot of the other colors, even number 3, which has some portions which lean a little brown, really you see a lot of pink and green in there. When it comes to Wilton's icing colors, we're really looking at a combination of 5 different food coloring molecules. Blue number 1, yellow number 5, yellow number 6, red number 3, and red number 40. There are some other food coloring molecules that are approved. I just don't come across them anywhere nearly as frequently as these 5. So ultimately, the number of colors you can create by mixing these 5 compounds together is staggering. I mean, Wilton has, with their line, has well over 20 different colors, and by mixing them together further, you can have even more hues. So it's interesting just how few molecules there are that we're dealing with when we're dyeing yarn with food coloring. The reason why so many commercial dyes don't break the same way that you see with food coloring is that a lot of commercial colors might not be a mixture of different colors. Some definitely are, and some commercial dyes break, But I think that there's a wider variety of colors that are used because you aren't limited to what has been approved for human consumption when you're dealing with, I guess, all of the colors that can be used on textiles. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you had as much fun with this live stream as I did. I thought it was so much fun to not only pre-sell some mystery surprise skeins of yarn, but have it such that the colors were going to be a mystery to me too. So therefore, I got to enjoy the surprise and the mystery as much as you. And I know that we're going to be doing something similar in the future. Probably will have to buy a lot more quarter teaspoon spoons so that way I can move things along faster. But I think that I'm working out plans to do something like this using liquid food coloring drops. So that way we can mix the colors a bit faster and maybe offer more than 8 skeins. If you would like to bring home some hand-dyed yarn dyed by me in one of the ChemKnits tutorials dyeing videos, check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store. You can find a link both in the video description and in the iCard. Thank you so much for joining me on this dyeing adventure. And if your skein of yarn is here on this video, I will be shipping them early next week. So you will be getting your beautiful, beautiful yarn very soon. Thank you so much for watching.